All right, so I do the start. My name is Ralf. It's R-A-L-F. I can't properly pronounce my name in English, but I hope that works for you. I'm based in Neubrandenburg, which is in the northeast of Germany. I have a wonderful wife, wonderful daughter, and I'm part of this little also wonderful community called Polylux, which means much light, and which lives in this neighborhood that I want to tell you a little bit about. You know, this seminar is called Songs of Engagement, and I think I'd like to tell you, we would both like to tell you a little bit about the neighborhoods first, because in order to kind of sing the song of the neighborhoods, you kind of need to know why things are the way they are, know a little bit about the history and the strengths and the challenges of your place. And I'm aware that I only have 5 minutes on this part, and so it's going to be a short song, where I try to kind of take you into my neighborhood for a little bit. We have pictures, as you can see. Our neighborhood is called Datzeberg, which is kind of an estate in the city of Neubrandenburg. You don't have to pronounce that yourselves, that's all right. It's a typical Eastern German or Eastern European neighborhood, and it has been built during GDR times. And in German we call it Plattenbauten, which is, you can learn that yourself to impress people at the next party after Corona. Datzeberg is kind of the skyline of the city of Neubrandenburg. You know, northern Germany is really flat. So it's kind of the only hill in the area. It's only 60 meters high. You know, the Swiss laugh at us, but we're very, very proud of the Datzeberg. To us, it's a real mountain, you know. Yeah, and the neighborhood is pretty young. It's only just about 40 years old. As you can see, there's a lot of concrete, a lot of grayness. From an aesthetic point of view, it's possibly not the most inspiring of all places. But when the Plattenbauten were built, they were kind of the modern, best equipped neighborhoods in town, you know, like with long distance heating and stuff, very convenient. Yeah, and I'm sure most of you know, like 30 years ago, the Berlin Wall came down, which was a pretty big thing for us Germans, kind of triggered by a regular prayer meeting, which started in the 80s. And so the two German countries were unified, and we in Germany call it the Wende, which means the turn. And straight after the Wende, and most people who could afford it moved away from the Plattenbauten areas. So those who couldn't move away stayed, and the Datzeberg is one of those places which became the cheapest kind of living areas in town. And so most people who live here don't have much of a choice, really, you know. Many of them are on the margin of society. We have in our neighborhood, we have 60% of the kids who grow up in families that are dependent on state transfer payments. So there's economic poverty, there's unemployment, there's a lack of social participation, and one could trace many of the problems of the neighborhood back to a certain lack of hope and perspective. So people who grew up here have a fairly rocky journey towards their own potentials, one could say. And most of them have they haven't heard much that they are loved, they're valuable, they're capable of stuff. So that's part of the truth. And at the same time, when we talk about our neighborhood, we don't like speaking of it first and foremost as a problematic or deprived area. A ghetto or whatever, you know. It has a very bad reputation in town, but we think that also stigmatizes people and reduces them to something negative, and they are way more than that. And so in that way, we don't want to live our calling on the back of those we live amongst, because the Datzeberg people are great people, you know. They're wonderfully made in the image of God, and you can find that too pretty easily. And so as a community, as a 24/7 monastically inspired community who live in the midst of the Datzeberg area, we wrestle for a loving but also realistic view on our neighborhood. Yeah, so poverty is one thing that's definitely the case for our neighborhood, at least in European German terms. But another chord of the song of a neighborhood is its a religious imprint, or its a religious worldview. And that is true for the whole of Eastern Germany. It's the most a-religious place in the world. And the difference between a-religious and atheist is that a-religious does not include a conscious decision. And that means people are kind of born into a belief system, into a worldview, and to most it's absolutely clear that there's no metaphysical, transcendent, spiritual dimension of life. You know, you can all that you can see is all there is. And there's a Catholic theologian called Tiefensee who said, or who put it like this, that people have become religiously unmusical. You know, and that's part for our neighborhood. That's true for our part of the neighborhood for sure. So some say people haven't forgotten anything, but they have forgotten what they have forgotten. So it's another step further. They have forgotten that they have forgotten God. So if you would ask people, what's your faith? Are you like Protestant, Catholic, whatever? Some would say, no, I'm normal, which for them means I'm not a believer in anything. Yeah. At the same time, God and church and whatever have a very negative reputation in our neighborhood. People are aware that this is there, but they don't like it too much. They're afraid of being evangelized, which is a funny mix with all sorts of different roots, but we can't really go into detail here due to time. Yeah, so that's part of the song of our neighborhood. Those things. Neighborhood, it's a religious neighborhood, but we love being here, and we're very aware that it's not us bringing God into it, but He's already there, and we can help identify God in here. We can support people in relating to Him. Yeah, that's my little thing on the song of our neighborhood. I think you could all hear me well, hopefully, and I pass over to Aaron.
Thanks, Ralf. That's beautiful. Thank you. And I really appreciate you saying that we don't want to tell our story off the back of the people in our own place. I think that's extremely important because people have a lot of names for my neighborhood. It's the poorest postal code in Canada. It's some people call it Pain and Wastings. We have a corner called Main and Hastings. They call it Pain and Wastings, or sometimes they've just called it 10 blocks of hell, but we call it home. You know, this is where we live. This is where I've lived for the last 17 years with my family and my community, where we live and where we minister, where we love our neighborhoods. And if you only see a neighborhood as a problem, then you'll want to get rid of it. But if you can see it for its beauty, then you'll actually want to fight for it. And so when people come down, and lots of people come down to do missions in our neighborhood, I'll often say, before we go anywhere, we need to talk about why you're here. What are you doing in my neighborhood? And then the first thing we'll do after that is I'll take people on what I call a tour of beauty. I want to show them the beautiful places in my neighborhood, because they're going to see the hard places very easily. It's going to take a little bit more work to see the beauty, but I can see it because I've been here for so long. I know it very well. So this is a little map of the neighborhood. I live in the Oppenheimer district there. Really, it used to be called the 24 block, our neighborhood. Now it's been kind of squished into a 10 square block. Vancouver is one of the most desirable cities in the world, always in the top 5 of best places in the world to live. But there's one little area where Vancouver has kind of tried to keep all of its issues in this one area, for fear of it getting out into the other areas. And that's where we live, called the downtown east side. You can go to the next slide. So this would be a very typical day in our neighborhood on Hastings Street. That's about a 3-minute walk from where I live. And when people come to the neighborhood, their first question when they see kind of what's going on, this is an open drug market, open drug use, open prostitution, so on. They'll say, how is this, like, why did this happen? How did this come to be? And I can answer that question. I don't know the individual stories of each person involved, though I do know many of the stories. But I also know the big structural story and the bigger systemic story and the bigger economic story and the bigger health story. I can tell you that in the 80s, a confluence of things happened where the federal government stopped a housing program and different mental health facilities were closed down. At the same time, there's a huge influx of crack cocaine. It says, sorry, we can't see the slides. Somebody says they can't see the slides. I don't know if everybody can't see them. Okay, some people can, some people can't. So there was kind of an influx of crack cocaine and heroin in the 80s, and also HIV/AIDS, and kind of all this came together to form really a perfect storm of homelessness and poverty and mental illness and addiction and health issues that the city again tried to sort of keep all in one spot, one small spot. And many of those issues have become even more problematic over the years. We can go to the next slide, please. These are some of my friends here. It's a neighborhood of protest. People don't want to leave. They don't want to be kicked out, and they're worried about things like gentrification. That's a big concern on people's minds, that it's the one area of Vancouver that hasn't been really developed by condo developers and other things. And so developers kind of look at the area and go, wow, we can take that and we can make millions and millions and millions of dollars off of that. But that would take the displacement of all the people who are here. So there's a lot of protest happening in our neighborhood and a lot of real noble fighting against some of those forces. We can go to the next slide, please. They're not too thrilled about some of the tours that come down. They call them the yuppie gazing tour. So when people come down, we say, first thing, do not bring your camera out and start taking pictures of people. Nobody likes that. They're not zoo exhibits. We're going to meet people we know and talk with people that we know, but you're actually walking into people's neighborhood. You're walking into people's living rooms in a lot of cases, so be respectful in that way. So you can see there's actually a great deal of pride in the neighborhood, as well as pain and frustration. You can go to the next slide. Every year, there's a huge gathering on February 14th, Valentine's Day, where everybody in the neighborhood knows we're all going to be at the corner of Main and Hastings. This is the corner here. And there's hundreds, thousands of people who come and remember many of the missing and murdered women from our neighborhood. There was some serial killers who were working in the neighborhood for years, and women, prostituted women, primarily First Nations women, Indigenous women, were being taken and abused and killed. And their families would be indicating, and their friends would be indicating to the police there's something going on. But because of the lifestyle, it wasn't really taken all that seriously. And so hundreds of women went missing and murdered. And so there's an annual remembrance, and we do a march around the entire neighborhood led by Indigenous women. So that's a huge, still open wound in our neighborhood, and something that we remember every year. Next slide, please. This is the park across the street from my house. This is a picture taken from the place that we would go in and pray every morning. We'd go for about a half hour every morning and pray right here. And people from these tents would come and join us often and pray. There's up to about 150 to 200 people living in the park just across from my house. And now these have all been removed. The police came in and removed them all. They've gone to another park, which is about a little bit further away from my house. But when you look at this park, you kind of go, whoa, that's just like it almost looks like a refugee settlement. And it kind of is. It's a homeless settlement that people in the city would look at and go, this is a blight, this is awful, we can't have this in our neighborhood. But they couldn't see the beauty within it. There were problems for sure, and I knew them very well, but people couldn't see the beauty. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you some of it. So this is a tent within the tent city across the street, and it was a prayer tent that I didn't set up. We just talked to some of the people who were living in the tent city, and we said, what if there was a prayer tent? They said, that'd be a great idea. They waited for a couple weeks for us to do it. We didn't do it, so they set it up. And they put on the side a house of prayer for all nations. And they just kept saying, it's open 24/7. Anybody can come in 24/7. We hadn't told them our name or anything. They said, it's open 24/7. And people would come in and pray in this space 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they had a church service Sunday mornings in this little prayer. It was absolutely wild until someone's tent burned down, and they decided it'd be better use to give them this tent to sleep in, which I think was appropriate. So there's incredible beauty and power and resiliency within all this. We can go to the next slide, please. This is my house that we've had for a little bit more than 7 years and have been renovating for a little bit more than 7 years, and will continue to renovate for the next little bit more than 7 years. On the left is an abandoned house. On the right, you can't quite see it, but is a functioning brothel. But this is our home, and we know the girls. They watch our van, our car at night. We know them by name, and we decided this is where we want to actually invest and live. And it was a crazy investment. It's a crazy place to live, but this is where we wanted to raise our kids and live in community together. Next slide, please. And this is our table, where just so many people have come around and eaten. And we have a community meal that's kind of open. Anybody can come in most nights a week. We've had to, obviously during COVID, switch that up a little bit, but not too much. And this is the place kind of where our major community rhythm happens, around this table. Next slide, please. We'll stop there. If we can go back to the main view, the gallery view or whatever it is, and I'll hand it back over to Ralf.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Hope you can all hear me. When Aaron and I kind of prepared for this, we thought we really need to talk about a little bit, at least, about the theology of holistic, because it has to do with what we do and how we relate to our neighbors and friends in the parts of town that we live in. So I want to just jump off a little bit from there and then become a little more practical and give you a little example of how we do it. We as a community fiercely believe into a holistic approach of church, of the gospel, and that's very relevant to our neighborhood. And by that I mean that God is on a mission, and he is up to something in this world and with this world, and we get to follow him into the unfolding of this story. And it's a beautiful but also a broken world that we follow him into, and you can see that in our neighborhoods. You can see both of it. And what God does is he brings healing into it, and he brings his shalom into it. And shalom, however you pronounce that Hebrew word in English, I don't know, is often translated by peace, but it's much more than the absence of war or conflict, but it's the very DNA of God's kingdom. And it always affects the whole person. And that's kind of the point. It means that God is not just in the business of getting us saved spiritually, of praying the right prayer, of believing the right things, but he's in the business of renewing and healing us holistically, the whole person and all its relational connections. And that, of course, includes our connection to God, but it also includes our connection to self. It also includes our connection to others around us. It includes our connection to environment. And all this belongs to each other. All of this is even connected. There are no non-essentials in our relational connections which are in need of God's salvation. And that's kind of the kind of theological ground, if you want. And practically for us, that means in the midst of our neighborhood that we when we came in here, we tried and learn first, listen first. We're here for almost 13 years now. And we did not start coming here with preaching the gospel, but with serving people practically. And we didn't do that as a means in order to preach, but because it is an essential part of God's mission in itself. Try not to answer any questions that no one had raised in the first place. We try to kind of trust Jesus to shine right through us to the people that would be around us. So just to become a little more practical, one among other kind of practical things that we did is that we in the past years we started a neighborhood choir, which I thought in the beginning is a really, really stupid idea to do something like that. At least it's not the coolest thing. It's something my parents would do, you know, but it's not very cool. And I don't sing in the choir myself, which is a blessing to everyone involved. But I now think it's like I'm a big fan because the choir meets once a week. They sing songs, obviously, songs from the radio. And the beauty of it is, to me, is that people who feel like they don't have much of a voice in life become part of the community and contribute something with their voices, with their actual voices, you know. And they meet once, we sing songs of the radio. Then after half a year, they do a concert and people come to listen to them. They are up on stage. They did a few videos that they put on YouTube. And they don't even sing like Christian songs, but we've seen so many transformational little glimpses of healing in this, because God is doing great stuff in the people who are part of the choir. You know, people get valued, they get loved, strengthened, empowered just by singing, just by belonging and being a part of it. And to us, this is as holy as a prayer meeting. You know, it's not no less an expression of the kingdom. And of course, we also have more direct opportunities, or set up more direct opportunities to get to know God in our neighborhood, and to to become part of an expression of church. But this is also a part of it without preaching almost, and it's part of a holistic way of living the kingdom. Yeah, so this is just an example. Yeah, I could tell you a few more, but I pass over to Aaron.
Thanks, Ralf. I want to sort of step back a little bit again into a little bit of the theology of why we do what we do around incarnation. It's a word that's, I know, thrown around a lot. It means, you know, literally putting flesh on. And it's extraordinarily important to our faith that Jesus put flesh on. And of course, he put the flesh on of humanity in a universal sense, but he also put the flesh on very specifically of a first century Jewish man, brown-skinned, in Palestine. And that really matters. He was born in Bethlehem and he was raised in Galilee, and he's called Jesus the Nazarene. And that really, really matters. There's a lot of place names in scripture, and they matter. They're not just there in order to give us like a really good kind of informed tour of the Holy Land 2,000 years later. They were there as people lived those experiences. They knew what those place names meant. They knew what it meant to say that Jesus was from Galilee or that Jesus was a Nazarene. That affected and shaped his interactions with people. And there's a lot of talk about the cosmic or the universal Christ these days. And of course, there's some truth to that. But actually, there's an incredible danger in it as well, in that in talking about his universality of Christ, we lose the particularity of Jesus, that he was incarnated in a place as a person with a particular skin. And so we see that throughout the stories of what Jesus does in scripture. When he goes places, where he's from matters, and he knows those places. So when he goes to meet the woman at the well, it's not just a woman at any well. She's in Samaria at Jacob's well. And any Jewish person reading that story would know immediately what this tells us. You know, there's a significance. And she says it right away when he starts talking to you. How is it that you, a Jewish man, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for water? That doesn't happen. These are place cues that we have to be aware of. When Jesus crosses, he leaves the area of Judea and crosses the sea to go and meet the man who's filled with demons, the demoniac. That matters. The place matters where he goes. When he goes into the area of Tyre and Sidon to meet the Canaanite woman or the Syrophoenician woman, again, those place names matter and they affect the story. Even Jesus's genealogy, which we typically skip because we're not used to genealogies, we don't know what they mean, would have been incredibly interesting reading to any first century Jewish person, because this tells the story of Israel. Jesus is embodying, inhabiting that story in his genealogy, and they're making it really clear right from the very beginning. And then later on, we see, like in the book of Revelation, where Jesus and John the Revelator, they're writing these letters to these 7 different churches in these 7 cities, and they know these cities intimately. And the fact that they know them is actually extremely important. They can speak not just to the spiritual significance of what's going on there, but they can speak to the economy. They can speak to the physical situation. They can speak to what the persecutions are. They can speak to the religious situation, who's worshiping the emperor or the cult of Diana there. So these are really, the fact that there are place names in scripture should really matter to us, and our place should matter to us. Of course, there is a commonality of Jesus to everyone, of course. But there is also a way that Jesus will incarnate in Neubrandenburg that is different than the way that Jesus will incarnate in the downtown east side. And that is different from the way that Jesus will incarnate in Nottingham or in Hamilton or wherever else that we're from here. That he, if he's taking on the flesh in his body, which is us, in those areas, then we should know them. And it concerns me greatly when I talk to churches that don't know their neighborhood intimately, that aren't completely conversant with where they live, as if it doesn't matter, as if the gospel is just some kind of universality that you just speak out into the ether and people will receive it. No, you have to speak the language of the people who are there. You have to understand, for instance, in my neighborhood, Ralf shared a little bit about how there's a negative impression of the gospel and so on in his area in Germany. In my area, a number of the people who live here, it's not just that there's kind of even a theoretical negative sense. They were abused and had land taken and had children taken away by people in the name of Jesus. That matters to the way that you start talking about Jesus in our neighborhood. You can see how that would make a difference, right? If someone had their children taken away in the name of Jesus and you come and say, hey, I represent Jesus, that's going to be an issue. You need to know that. I remember going to a place once I was living for a little bit and I asked, what's the injustices? What are the kind of real issues in this city? And the pastor said, oh, there aren't really any. And it took me a day to find where the area was that people were like, this is a depressed area. Nobody really wants to go here. Like, our eyes have to be open to what is actually going on, because Jesus wishes to incarnate in these places specifically. And I think there's also kind of a Christian missional idea that you can kind of go and drop yourself into places for a couple months at a time and then go out, or a week at a time or whatever, and leave and have an impact. We can have an impact. It will largely be negative when we do that. We need churches and Christians who are willing to say, I'm going to live here and raise my children here and know this place and put the flesh on for the rest of my life. I'm going to stop. Jesus has called me here. I love the story of the Moravians when they went off to do mission. They would bring a casket. They would build a casket and bring it with them and say, we're going to die here. And you might be the ones to kill us, but you won't have to pay our funeral expense because we've already brought our casket. I think that's the kind of thing that God is calling his church to now, is this deep rootedness, this deep embeddedness, this deep embodiment within a community that understands it well. So Ralf, we've got about 15 minutes left. I've got this thing around exegeting the neighborhood. Should I go into that, or did you want to hit your stuff? Was there something you wanted to hit before I do that?
No, go into it. That's cool. I'm totally with you. Maybe I can just jump onto, I just want to like confirm what you said about like being part of the neighborhood and then, yeah, I think for us as a community, and I'm going to skip the rest, but when, we set up a charity, do all kinds of projects in the neighborhood, but kind of the main thing for us is we moved here. We do view ourselves as neighbors and friends. That's who we are. We're here to stay, and we kind of try and call that kind of the ministry of presence. We are here, and we are part of this community, and that's kind of the main thing people need to know about us. And I think that's the easiest and the hardest thing to do at the same time. So I had over.
No, totally. I mean, when people come for a week, they'll often ask me, what do we do when people ask us for money? And I always have to shift gears in my brain, because it's just not a live question for me. That's a question when you first go into a neighborhood. When you've been in a neighborhood for 17 years and you know everybody, the people who are asking me for money typically know me, and they know whether I have it or not. And if I have it, I'm happy to give it because they're my friends. I share this story sometimes, that there's, again, next door, there's girls who are in sex work next door to me. And one of them, a transgender woman who knows us. And when a new girl comes in and starts asking if I want a date, she will usually run out of the building and go, no, don't ask him. He's a Christian man. He's a good Christian man. So she's like the protector of my virtue, because they know me. I couldn't even sin if I wanted to in that way. Like they'd be like, no, this man, you cannot bring him in. So it's just a different level of questions, and they're not easier, but there's a different level of questions that you get to engage with when you're in a place for a longer period of time. And it does take time to gain trust as well. So I want to go through some real practical tools now to how you get to know a neighborhood. And a lot of this comes from a group called Direction Chrétienne, the Christian Direction in Montreal. They've done a lot of work on how do you know a neighborhood, and they call it neighborhood exegesis. Exegesis, we know biblically, is how you pull or draw meaning out of a text, how you understand what it was meant to mean, and you draw meaning out. So they said, well, what if we tried to do that with the neighborhoods and the communities that we lived in? So if we can go to the slides again, I'll walk you through this. If you want this, the little HTTPS there, the website, I suggest that you copy that and save it for later, because it goes through these 20 steps in a lot of detail on how to exegete a neighborhood. So do take a moment to just sort of copy that down if you like. And then I've put my book on the side there, Recovering from Brokenness and Addiction to Blessedness and Community, because one of the chapters I go through this in some detail, talking about how to practically get to know the area that you're living in and how important that is. So you can feel free to order that if you like. I'm not trying to do a self-promotion here, but it is in there in some more detail. So Church for Vancouver, if you want to just copy that out quickly. We can go to the next slide. Hopefully everyone got that. If not, maybe somebody can put it in the chat. Okay, so here are some steps and we do this regularly, sometimes once a year, because neighborhoods change. So we take this very intentionally, in the same way that we want to intentionally study scripture well, we want to study our neighborhood well. And the step one is prayer walk. Prayer walk, prayer walk. You should be walking and praying every inch of your neighborhood. You should know it intimately in prayer. And you should be asking the Lord, where are you and what are you doing and what do you know about this neighborhood? Because you must believe that God was there before you were. And that was a bit of a surprise to us when we showed up, because we thought, oh, we're going to bring Jesus to the poor and to the downtown east side. And it was a terrible shock to find out that Jesus was already here, because then now what are we supposed to do? And we actually started to learn that this was a great place to meet Jesus versus just coming down to give Jesus away. So if we can go back, so prayer walking, you should be doing this regularly. Everybody in your community, if you can, should be doing this regularly, once a week, and going to all the alleys, going to everywhere you can, and writing down what you hear. And really collating that and studying, what is it that we're hearing from the Lord? What are we seeing? What is God drawing our attention to? What is the spiritual atmosphere of this place? So prayer walking, prayer, I think if you do nothing else, this would be good to do. But you can also, in addition to that, you should be studying the history and the demographics of your neighborhood. You should know, why is this neighborhood the way it is? So Ralf explained a little bit, well, why his neighborhood is the way it is. I explained a bit why mine is, so I can have a reasonable answer when people say, why is this the way it is? Because people will come up with all kinds of crazy ideas, especially missionaries. Especially, like they'll go, oh, it's like this because of this. I'm like, well, no, it's because the federal government stopped a housing program and people can't afford housing. That's why people are homeless. And I can speak about that meaningfully. You can also talk about, what are big events that happened in the neighborhood that have really shaped things. So the missing and murdered women stuff that I talked about, and the gentrification and the 2010 Olympics. I could talk to you for a long time about that, because it really massively impacted our neighborhood, because it happened, a lot of the stuff right around it. So you got to know that, and you got to know who's living in our neighborhood, and you can study that. There are government reports about what are the languages spoken, what is the income that's happening here, what kind of businesses. You should know that stuff. If there is a sudden influx of a particular language group or ethnic group in your neighborhood, you should know that, and you should start learning that language, right? If you are actually going to be incarnating that neighborhood as it's changing, you can't just be, oh, this neighborhood's changing and I can't understand the language anymore. Learn the language. That's your neighborhood. It's even just a couple phrases. One of the things that we did was say, what was the language that was spoken 500 years ago in our area? Because in North America, it was a lot was taken over, and we're an unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. So we started learning how to say some words in that language, which is nearly a dead language. We say that's important for us to understand as well, because there's still a lot of indigenous folk in our neighborhood, and they have been historically dishonored and displaced. And so we need to do some work to try and figure that out as well. So understand the people, the languages, the businesses that are there. Do a survey of what kind of economy is happening here. Then talk to your neighbors intentionally, and not just sort of casually. We actually send people out with clipboards to go to houses and go to businesses to ask questions. Specifically, how long have you been in this neighborhood? What do you think about this neighborhood? What do you know about this neighborhood? What are your hopes for this neighborhood? What are your fears in this neighborhood, around this neighborhood? And we start putting those questions together as well, so we get a real sense of what's going on. People who are homeless, we ask them those questions as well. So you start to really, and I mean, it's obviously there's opportunities to do evangelism in those scenarios as well, but really you're just asking questions before you start telling people what you think they want to know. I love what Ralf said. We didn't start telling people answers to questions they weren't asking, because people do have questions, and maybe you could start answering or trying to find the answers to some of those questions that people actually, it's on their heart. And if it's on their heart, it's probably on God's heart as well. You need to start discerning some of the power dynamics in your neighborhood. So, it's very easy for us when we see groups of young people coming in the neighborhood, they're all wearing the same color t-shirt, they're on some kind of mission group. They don't understand the power that they carry as they walk into a neighborhood. They don't really get that. We need to understand that. I need to understand the power that I hold as a white man in a neighborhood. And to understand, how do I start laying that down? What does that mean? How do people feel when I walk in a room? And who are the power brokers in a neighborhood? Who are maybe the people of peace? Who are the people who can open doors for you? And what are the felt needs? So a lot of people come down just with food, because if it's poor, they must be hungry. A lot of people aren't really actually all that hungry in our neighborhood. They need other things, but people want to come down with food, and the place is just flooded with really malnutritious food. So that's not particularly helpful, because nobody's asked the question, what do you need? Understand the services and the meeting points, the religious activity, how news spreads in your neighborhood. And you can just do this. It's just a way to study. In our neighborhood, there's a gossip chain. You need to know who are the major gossipers, the people who are getting that information out there. If you want to know something, I know some people who I need to go talk to. Have you seen this person? Is this person dead? Is this person in jail? Where is this person? There are people who will know that information. You need to, and the longer you hear, the longer you'll start to understand that. How does this neighborhood connect to other neighborhoods and to rural communities? What is the local artistic expression? We're talking about the songs of engagement. You need to know, who are the artists? What do the tags mean if there's graffiti in your neighborhood? Who's writing songs from your neighborhood? I would so much rather the church sing songs that come from their neighborhood than that we'd sing the latest Hillsong offering. Nothing against Hillsong, but sing the songs, even if they're not particularly religious. Sing the songs of your neighborhood. Display the art of your neighborhood. This is the flesh of your neighborhood. It really matters. We're doing a project here. You can see the little website in 24/7 Prayer Canada called Exergo Arts, which is just trying to have local artists and display what they're doing for sale on our website in a bunch of different communities in Canada. Just say, we need to hear the art. We need to see the art and hear the songs of our nation and our communities in order to understand it well. Then you can start going, what have the churches done and are doing? How are they partnering in this neighborhood? What services or things are they duplicating? Where are they hopeful? Where are they fearful? That's more than just getting the pastors together to have a coffee. That's actually doing some deep digging, saying, what's gone on here? Are there any historic church splits here that we need to do some repenting of? Are there churches that really have a heart here for serving the poor? Are there churches really have a heart here for teaching the word? Who's doing what, and how do we join together in this? And there's probably hidden expressions of church in your neighborhood as well, in your community, that it would be good to try and find out, where are they and what are they doing, and where are they hopeful and fearful? And to organize all this as we do as a community activity, and beyond just your church, ideally, to have Christians going out and doing this regularly, so that we really are knowing the neighborhood. And I think that's a theological and a missional work. And it's also, it will lead you into great joy and beauty, because you'll get to know your neighbors in a very deep way and be able to speak meaningfully about what is actually on their hearts. So that's just some very practical tools. I don't know if we have another screen. I can't remember. If we go to the, yeah. So these are just from indicators of it. I know that it's a bit blurry. Indicators of a transformed city. I'll just leave this here for you. You can maybe take a screenshot. But this is what people were saying. This is what we know if a city is actually doing well. If our prayers are having impact, our prayers and our action, we'll see an increased number of churches actively involved in spiritual transformation. The people of God will be animated by a passionate spirituality. 3, we'll see leaders desirous to see the people of God using their gifts. We'll see equality in economic, social policy, language acquisition. We'll see happy, well-developed children and youth. These are markers of God's action in a city. And we don't want to just say, throw stuff at the wall and hope it sticks. We actually want to be able to measure, what is it that we're doing? And how is it that it's impacting? And if it's not, are we doing something wrong? Or are we being faithful and it's just hard ground and we need to keep at it? So these are some indicators of a transformed city that I think are really helpful for us to be praying into. So that is, I think we have time for some questions. Sorry, I know we've gotten almost a little bit over. I didn't see Carol saying. Carol says, I bake bread for every neighbor, and all but 2 out of 29 times I was asked in the house, really got to know them. Amen. Yeah, that it can be as simple as that, but it has to be intentional like that. Are there questions? I think we can do questions on chat. Is that the best way to do that, you think, Ralph and Jake? And yeah. I know that was a bit like drinking from the fire hose. But hopefully that made some kind of sense. That is a lot of bread. That's true, Carol. A nourishing fire hose. Well, hopefully. So if there are any questions, please do feel free to ask, and Ralph or I can try and answer them. All totally clear and totally convicting? How have you engaged short-term teams? Ralph, have you had that issue?
We actually had a 24/7 team in our place like 2 years ago, something. And that was really cool. It was like, I think 5 or 6 wonderful people who joined us, who helped us practically. We were involved into a neighborhood party that we helped setting up, and then they did a lot of great stuff. At least most of them didn't speak German, which didn't help connecting with people from the neighborhood, but they were a great support. And we also took like prayer trips into the area of the northeast of Germany, and that was wonderful. And we feel like even though people are very like hesitant in our neighborhood towards like Christian stuff and missionaries or whatever, they're very open to people, and they just welcome people. And if people try to make an effort to speak some German, they would just, you know, meet them half the way and connect. And it was just beautiful to see that. Yeah. So I think, yeah, short-term teams can really help with doing stuff in certain time frames that kind of help the altogether community involvement. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Very good. And we often give people a real front loading of that kind of information that I just gave, and talk about how, like, try at best, or at most, try not to cause any damage here. And we tell them some words that you shouldn't say, some things that you shouldn't do, and then say, this is actually largely for you to come and meet Jesus here, you know, and there are ways that you can be a blessing to us. And we try and be very, very intentional about that, but we don't just go and let people loose, because it's actually quite dangerous to our friends. There were some questions about stuff during lockdown and quarantine. Prayer walking, we found, at least where we are, there's no kind of saying you can't do that. But if you're not allowed to go and even walk your streets, I would get a map a local map of your city and just trace it with your fingers and start mapping that and prayer walking that way. There are ways to do it. In terms of having people over during quarantine, we've had to be a little bit more careful about that. But we kept, as our local Jacob's Well community, it's a local kind of faith community here in the neighborhood. We said we can't have people in right now, so we're going to go out. We went and delivered groceries and delivered food as we could because people really needed to eat, and we also knew that people did need to make connection because here way more people died of drug overdose and suicide than they have of corona. And so we've gone out weekly and sometimes daily just to go and call our friends, see people on the streets, and just in safe ways with masks and so on, but still connecting with people as we can. Because the church doesn't close. It never closes. The building, the Sunday morning service might, but the church never closes and the mission never ends. So you have to really be thinking creatively. And if you know a neighborhood, you can. How do we still do this? There are a lot of people in our neighborhood who are not going to obey the government regulations. And we had to be aware of that as well. Just we're not. And so we had to try and keep them safe as we could and keep ourselves, relatively safe as well as we were doing that. But yeah, I mean, it's a whole new creative issue, but we can get through it. Any advice on bringing up children in the neighborhood where things might be countercultural for them? Ralph, any thoughts?
I didn't get the first part of the question, but
bringing up children in the neighborhood.
Yes, I think it's great to do that. I mean, our neighborhood isn't, as I said, doesn't have the best reputation. My daughter learned some swear words earlier than I would have taught her, but I think it's like we deliberately kind of put her into kindergarten in our neighborhood because we wanted her to relate to that, to the people and to our neighbors and friends and their kids. And I think it's the kids don't have a big problem doing that. They just build relationship instantly. And I guess I guess that our daughter, for example, she will probably build some other relationships too that some in our neighborhood won't. But at least this will be one part of her relational context that most others in her school at some point won't have, and that's part of life, and that's a big thing to all of us. So they relate. She relates wonderfully to some kids from our neighborhood, and I also think that it even builds bridges into other people's homes that we wouldn't have without our daughter. So, and
Absolutely.
that's true for most of our community as well.
Yeah. That's probably the biggest question we get asked is about our kids. We've raised 4 kids. We have a number of kids in our lives. And, we wouldn't, I often say I wouldn't want to raise them anywhere else. I'd be scared to raise them near a mall. The people in our neighborhood who are dangerous, we know. And they have like 400 bodyguards who, if anybody was trying to hurt them, they'd be literally killed. And so that's it's actually dangerous. But when we walk down the street and always have, people start yelling, kids on the block, and they put all their stuff away. There is a prophetic power of having children there. And we're obviously careful with our kids. We had rules like you can't pick stuff up off the ground, that kind of thing. And then when my son was old enough where I saw him walking, he was wearing a hoodie. And I'm like, oh, you actually look tall enough that you might just be in the neighborhood. I had to tell him, here's the names of things that you might be offered. And they've seen drug abuse and they're like, well, I never want to do that. It's not attractive to them at all. So, that's not a worry, but I said, here's the things. And if a girl comes and asks you in the neighborhood for a date, it means this. It means that she wants you to pay for sex. And he's like, oh my gosh. And then the next day he came running home and he was all out of breath. I'm like, what's wrong? He's like, I was at the local market and this lady started talking to me and I just yelled, no. And I ran home. And I was like, oh, who was she? She's like, yeah, this is an older Chinese lady. I'm like, no, probably not. She wasn't asking you for a date. She was probably just, want to know if you were going to buy groceries. So, you have to, but I think our kids have been incredibly blessed in this. Another question here I know we're running out of time.
The last one now, if we can just say over on a little bit. Yeah. This one, the last one.
How do you break out of this kind of ministry from an affluent church whose members are middle class and upwards? This will sound self-serving. I'll just say, I wrote the book partly for this, to try and help churches understand that these issues that seem to be affecting poorer neighborhoods are not absent from your church. They're just better hidden. Addiction is present in every church, and attachment is present in every single church. And you will be enormously blessed by having people in your midst who have walked through that, because it will highlight what's going on actually in your own lives, in your own affluenza. So the church needs this. And so I do recommend reading that. There I go into great detail about how to do exactly that, how to break into this kind of ministry from an affluent place where we think we've got it all together, but actually we don't. And I say to guys all the time in recovery, you are so blessed that the thing that you found, you understood, you couldn't control, because everybody else in the world needs to be going through the same kind of stuff that you're going through in terms of repentance and awareness and making amends and, you know, going through your resentments, but they won't, because they think they have it under control, and most churches do. It's rife with attachment and addiction. And so I think we need to do this work for our own blessing as well. Ralf, any thoughts?
I just leave it to it. I think that's, yeah, it's good. Read the book.
Brilliant. Yes. So Aaron's book is out. Aaron, do you want to do a quick shout out?
Yeah, it's called, my name is Aaron White, and it's called Recovering from Brokenness and Addiction to Blessedness and Community. You can get it. I hate saying you can get it at Amazon, because that's one of the big attachments. I recommend people going to their local independent bookseller and asking them to order it, or go to the library and ask them to order it, or find, you know, Baker Academic is the publisher, so you can order it directly from them if you like.
Right. Ralf, any last words before we hand over?
Just I'm sorry we didn't get to most of the questions. Totally happy to connect via, I'm as old to be on Facebook still, so you can find us there and maybe bring some questions there if you like. But thanks a lot for engaging in this, and most of all, engaging in your neighborhood.
Amen.